There's a huge gap between what we set down, what some of the cleverest, most brilliant people who've ever lived, writers, set down a piece of paper, and then the grubby business of our day-to-day politics, of course.
The United States tomorrow marks 250 years since the Declaration of Independence, when the 13 colonies declared themselves independent sovereign states no longer subject to British colonial rule. It states that all men are created equal and have an inalienable right to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Today we're asking whether the American dream, a phrase first popularised in the 1930s, is alive and well. Here's how the former President Ronald Reagan thought of it in 1983.
The American dream lives, not only in the hearts and minds of our own countrymen, but in the hearts and minds of millions of the world's people in both free and oppressed societies who look to us for leadership. As long as that dream lives, as long as we continue to defend it, America has a future, and all mankind has reason to hope.
Well, those are poignant words considering the situation America finds itself in today. That was, of course, President Ronald Reagan. And to discuss all of that, America at 250, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the historian and host of the podcast History Hit, Dan Snow. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've never had somebody so enthusiastic on the show. It's lovely to have you. And Sarah Churchwell, she's the Professor of American Literature at the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll try to match Dan's enthusiasm.
Yes, this is going to be a very enthusiastic discussion. Dan, you're the British historian here. How important is the Declaration of Independence? Is it as important as the signing of Magna Carta in 1215?
Listen, the reason I'm enthusiastic is because if you're on a show with Sarah Churchwell, it's one of the cleverest and most articulate people in the world. You've just got to ratchet up enthusiasm because that's all I've got. So listen, Ed, I know that was a trick question because Magna Carta, of course, was not signed. It was the seals were affixed to it. And here's a funny thing about the Declaration of Independence, the one that we all see with the signatures on it, with the John Hancocks on it. That was actually a sort of souvenir edition that was done a couple of weeks later. The Declaration of Independence was unanimously agreed to in the Continental Congress. And then it was printed. So it's the printed version. 200 printed versions were produced and they were sent out across the colonies. One of them is in the UK National Archives today. It's an exhibition. I urge you to go and see it. It is much more important than Magna Carta. It is a profoundly revolutionary document. It's probably the most important piece of paper, I think, in the history of politics in the world. It lays out a completely different basis for running a society, one that had never been attempted before. It lays out the idea that the people that are governed are themselves governors. It's in some ways a kind of utopian and extraordinary political experiment. And it's also important because it is the founding moment of the USA, which will go on to become the most important, powerful and remarkable nation that the world has ever seen in the late 20th, early 21st century. So yeah, certainly standing today at the moment, I think you can't deny this is far more important than any other similar piece of paper produced by politicians.
And Sarah Churchwell, Dan is absolutely right there. It's a real sort of break with what had gone before. It's declaration of the basic truths about humanity, language that still resonates today. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The historian Joseph Ellis called these words the most potent and consequential words in American history, and arguably in the history of the world in some ways.
Well, I think that's absolutely the point that Dan was making, and I completely agree with it. It is just that those ideas were radical, as Dan says. They were revolutionary, and they spread. They spread to the French immediately afterwards. But this was what the colonies were doing at that point in throwing off Britain was showing. It's really the beginning of the modern post-colonial independence movement. And people don't think often of the United States as being a former colonial society that is now wrestling with being post-colonial, but it was just the first. And so the setting forth this principle of self-government, as Dan says, this is the radical principle. And of course, it's first articulated by an Englishman, by Thomas Paine, who comes to the US. He meets Ben Franklin in London and goes to the US, and he says to the American colonists, did you guys notice that you're already self-governing? Because you've been self-governing for a long time, and you should just make it official. artificial because Parliament doesn't, in fact, govern you. And he famously says, in America, the law is king. And so this principle that we would be self-governed by rules that we all sign up to is, to me, the most fundamentally radical part of that, so of the rewriting of the social contract that the Declaration of Independence sets out. And then it established a set of promises that actually went far beyond the intentions of the authors of that document, because its promises were so sweeping and so far-reaching that, they didn't intend men to include women, and they didn't intend it to include the enslaved, and it didn't include the indigenous. But once you make a statement like that, it does include those people, and they start demanding that you uphold those promises, and that you hold yourselves accountable to them. And that's been the kind of long sweep of the American political project, has been to try to make that promise a reality.
Yes, and that's what's you talked there, Sarah, about the long sweep, and that's exactly the point, isn't it, Dan Snow? That you think when you read the Declaration of Independence that America springs kind of fully formed, but the reason I think the history of America resonates so much is that we see this nation being born over more than 100 years, because of course Lincoln refers to the Declaration of Independence in his Gettysburg Address, one of the bloodiest wars in the American Civil War. The American colonies were just one part of the continent. You still had the Spanish and the French. It took a long time for the America that we know today to be born.
Still a work in progress, man. I mean, it's still, we're still, and we humans, Americans, are still trying to live up to the promise of those initial founding documents. As you say, they were reaffirmed in one of the most astonishing speeches in human history. Lincoln, in the space of 2 minutes, explains the importance of that moment. It explains the importance of the revolution, explains the importance that why young men were dying in vast numbers for the promise of what the promises contained in that document. It's why Martin Luther King, it's why Barack Obama, it's why other people have been able to articulate that. And it's still something we're trying to live up to. And that's why Reagan talks about it as a kind of, in that sense, it's a gift for all mankind, which it is, because I think that it's difficult for us to understand, but the human history, or maybe it's not difficult for us to understand, sadly, human history, we normies have found ourselves ruled over by people we can't understand why they're there, but they are psychopathic barbarians who rule over us. And then their sons get to rule over us, and their grandkids as well, until another group of maniacs come and replace them. And what this document does is the question that we've all been asking ourselves since we kind of organized and lived together in communities, like, how can we stop these people just telling us what to do and taking our stuff and taking our women and taking our goods and taking our children and treating us terribly? And that really is the kind of central mission of civilized humanity, and it continues to this day. And that the document that we're talking about that was printed out tomorrow night 250 years ago is a clarion call in that journey, and it's by no means a done deal.
It's absolutely by no means a done deal. And also there's a sort of paradox contained in the Declaration of Independence, isn't there, Sarah Churchwell, which is that it does kind of lay down a set of rules. It's kind of the first time that a nation is born where it's effectively stating that everyone will be subject to the rule of law, but at the same time it's part of a revolution, and it's left this part of the American psyche, which perhaps we in Britain don't fully understand, we Europeans don't fully understand, of kind of mistrust of government, individualism, the pioneer, because, America takes so long to be born and fully formed, and it's born in bloodshed, that there is this paradox of the rule of law being at the heart of the Declaration of Independence, but at the same time a mistrust of government which pervades American politics.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to keep quoting Paine, but actually, again, that's something that he really addresses in Common Sense, which is the kind of foundational document before the Declaration. And what he says there is, basically government is there for when people aren't getting along with each other. Government is there to solve problems and to stop us from harming each other. And if we're all getting along, we kind of don't need government. So it's because we're not utopian, because we're a work in progress, as Dan said, that we have to have government. So it becomes a suspicion of government in its negative form. But in a positive form, it's a sort of, well, we'd like to be able to create a society where we're all constructively working together and the government isn't necessary at that stage. But that's also only possible in a very small society. And so what you do is you create representative government when you have a large society. The problem with the United States is that it's big. It's the size of Europe. So, you talk about how Europeans look at it, and we have to recognize that when we talk about Americans today, we're talking about a landmass the size of Europe and a population the size of Europe, which is when people say to me, why is the United States, why don't people agree with each other? And I sort of say, well, why don't people across Europe agree with each other? There's just too many people. And so the part of what the process of that long historical development that we've been talking about is actually, that's why we're celebrating the Declaration right now, but 11 years later was when the Constitution was written. It took 11 years for the Constitution to come into being, for them to figure out what the actual form of government would look like. And then, there was resistance to that because it looked like it might be centralized government. So there has been this push-pull, this tension and friction around the question of how much government and what kind of government, because that all gets back to that central question that Dan was talking about authority and power and how it works and who holds it. And so the feeling that, and again, I don't think this is alien to Europeans, the feeling that the further away from you the people who are making the decisions are, that starts to become very problematic. You start to feel that you don't have any connection to the levers of power. You start to feel estranged from the people making the choices. You think that they're not accountable. And this is very much the same debates that we were having when we left the European Union. It was very much about, well, the EU isn't accountable to us. That's a centralized government that sits somewhere else. So call that a suspicion of government. It's the same mechanism. It's the same resistance, is this feeling that I want people in my community that I recognize to be making the decisions that affect my life. So as I say, when it gets negative and distorted and poisoned, then yes, it becomes that suspicion of government that you're talking about, which can become kind of reflexive. It's also almost automatic in some communities in America now. I agree with you, and I'm not trying to deny that reality, but I think that that's where it comes from, and that it doesn't have to be framed as that suspicion. It is about how does independence work and what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think what is also fascinating about the American Declaration of Independence, it is a sort of self-regarding document. It's a romantic document about what it means to be American and what America is. And yet with each anniversary, it takes place against the backdrop of of America sort of going wrong. I was actually in America in the 200th anniversary, and that was in the backdrop as a young boy with my father. Vietnam, Watergate, and now, of course, for the 250, we have Trump. There is this contrast, isn't there, Dan Snow, between the ideal encapsulated by the Declaration and the reality of what America can be at any one moment.
Ed, you don't look old enough to have been there in America. I don't believe that for 1 second. That must have a primary school trip. That's a heck of a field trip. Well, listen, of course, there's a huge gap between what we set down, what some of the cleverest, most brilliant people who've ever lived, writers, set down a piece of paper, and then the grubby business of our day-to-day politics, of course, but it's something to aim for. Weirdly, okay, so the biggest battle of the American War of Independence is actually the Battle for New York, which takes place this summer, 250 years ago. So that's kind of a really interesting anniversary. And if the British General Howe had got off his backside and actually done some work, I think we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd also be one big happy family.
We really should not have won that war, Dan.
Yeah, well, tell me about it.
I think you would have won it eventually.
And so... And the people of New York was a loyalist town to a certain extent. And when the Brits took New York in the summer of 1776, they released a Declaration of Dependence. And it just really strikes me that it's just so lame. I mean, like that you're not going to win that. As you talk about the kind of excitement and the idea that the ideas, and this was a lurking problem with the Brexit debate, is that the other side just it's you align our ideas about personal autonomy and fulfillment and releasing ourselves from the chains that bind us in kind of our personal lives or our health, our mental health. And it's just so much more exciting to talk about independence and self and autonomy and self-government. And that's the problem, that anyone who argues for these trans-maritime,
Yes.
transnational,
boring,
heterodox states you have to deal
bureaucratic. Sarah, last word to you, and very quickly because we run out of time. But the Reagan speech really again resonated because the Declaration not only became a symbol of American identity, but American values projected across the globe. That is not where we are today with America.
No, it's not, because America's betraying those promises, as we've been saying. But as you rightly said, Ed, it has always betrayed those promises throughout its history. And what we're really talking, another way of saying what we're talking about, is that this is about aspiration. This is about human aspiration. The aspiration is never the reality. So right now, America is very far from the aspiration. There is a huge gap between the aspiration and the reality. And we're looking, we're staring at corruption and, outright, the betrayal of the rule of law and, on and on and on. So the gap is huge, but the aspiration remains real, and it remains valuable, and it remains something that we need to continue to fight for, not just America, but everybody. We'll go back. Let's give Lincoln the last word. His famous inaugural speech about the better angels of our nature. Will we listen to the better angels of our nature, or let the darker forces, in human nature prevail? Right now, that's what's happening in America, in my view. But we don't give up the fight. We just have to keep saying there is a better world, and we have to get cracking on building.
Well said. We'll give Abraham Lincoln the last word, and we'll say thanks to Dan Snow. You can listen to an episode of his history hit podcast, The Birth of America Explained. And thanks also to Sarah Churchwell. She'll join host Josh Glancy and the historian aptly named Adam Smith in London on July the 9th as they discuss what the next century holds for the world's defining superpower. For tickets, head to thetimes.com/events.